Washington beat Tulsa 43-10. The receivers played a little bit more of the run game than we thought initially. We're going to get into it here on Locked On Huskies.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Another Monday edition of Locked On Huskies. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day. And, I just want to remind everybody real fast, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get 200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Lars Hanson, it's great to have you with me here today on this Sunday afternoon as we record this. Little peek behind the curtain for everybody who didn't already know that we did that. If you didn't, got some news for you. But I just want to jump right in here. It's going to be Monday morning when people are listening to this. So the big question here is, what are your thoughts after Washington's win on Saturday over Tulsa 43-10?
It was a little bit better than what we saw to start against Boise State because, they actually got some points on the board on the first two drives. They didn't have to punt right away. So I think that was an improvement. You're kind of seeing the gears get a little bit more going. But again, the gears still aren't fully there. And I think we saw it even on both sides of the ball. It was better on defense than what we saw against Boise State. But again, still not where they need to be, especially when it comes to the meat of the season. But they don't have to be there yet. But right. I think overall we saw enough improvement in the areas that they needed to. Again, I didn't necessarily see as much in the run game, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later on. But I think for the most part, aside if we're going to be nitpicky, that would be where the issue is. But for the most part, where they needed to improve, they did, and they got the result they needed to.
Also, we should add the fact that you informed Kalen DeBoer that was the first game since 2009 where he was the head coach and his team did not punt in the game. So fun little. Just extra fact that we should throw in there for the fans. But one of my biggest takeaways was, and it's something that you can go read about on Inside the Huskies, and we'll talk about more about the defense in the second segment, but I just really wanted to give a huge shout out to Jabar Muhammad, because one thing that this team really needed was a number one lockdown cornerback. And I mean, Lars, is it fair to say that since Jabar, really since the first game of the year, he's been that guy just through two games this season? I know it's early.
Yeah, I mean that's almost that is the unique caveat, is especially because I talked about it on my notebook piece on Inside the Huskies, where it's again you got to remember who they played the first 2 weeks, but absolutely, yeah. I mean, again, cause for concern, none. Jabar Muhammad's done exactly what they brought him in to do: take away half the field and let the second cornerback spot sort of just sort itself out as they go along. And Jabar has done exactly that. And I think he's also made a huge role as a mentor for the younger guys, Elijah Jackson, even Thaddeus Dixon, who
Devon Banks too.
Yep.
He was somebody I say Devon Banks specifically because I got to ask him about it on Tuesday, which is in my Jabar Muhammad story that is up on Inside the Huskies. Bang, 3 plugs, 30 seconds. That was impressive. But no, I really, and one last thing on Jabar, because obviously we need to talk about the offense and Michael Penix being who he is. But now through 2 games, Jabar has allowed 3 catches for 21 yards. That's really impressive. And one of them, was that third down conversion early on in the game. But I mean, those are really tough to defend, those quick slants where it's just one step really to release. And those are really hard to break on for defensive backs. So I don't really necessarily fault him for that. But yeah, no, he's been really, really solid. And then looking at Michael Penix, I mean, yeah, he threw an interception, but there's, some questionable call on a face mask, as we have discussed on Twitter, on here, that, maybe that wasn't all his fault. And Roma Dunze did run a pretty solid route and looked like he got interfered with at the very top of it. So do with that what you will, but another 400-yard day, and has just continued to solidify that he is at, what would you say the floor is for him? Top 3 quarterback in the country? Top 5?
Yeah, floor is 3, but he's not 3. I think again, we've said it before. What separates Michael Penix and Caleb Williams is the legs. And Michael even showed it, but Michael even showed against Tulsa, hey, I'm not necessarily as natural of a runner. Like he's not going to be a track star. Like, Caleb Williams kind of just has that more natural. When he was running at Oklahoma, he had that same sort of deal where 60, 70 yard runs.
He's got that extra gear.
Right, exactly. Where not that Penix doesn't have those gears, but he's just that arm. You don't necessarily need it, and when he does, he has just as much pizzazz, that spin move to get the was it a third down conversion or a fourth down?
Yeah, third down
on the option where it's like, oh, you would think easily just pitch it to, I believe it was Polk or maybe it was Devin Culp. I can't remember who the wide receiver / tight end was on the outside. But the point was, it was an easy one where no matter who you're throwing it out to, they're going to get those 2 yards to get the first down. And Penix says, no, I got this. And get
slam the B
down.
button for all people out there.
Right, exactly. What would be on the PS3 in circle?
Yep, there you go.
Oh man, I'm a PS3 kid, so
PS3 still?
Don't actually. Shout out Brett Favre. No. But
we don't need to get into our gaming habits here because I could spend all day talking about my MLB The Show Diamond Dynasty team. But no, and it's something where one person that I know we highlighted him a little bit on our live reactions after the game on Saturday was Jeremy Bernard, because he makes plays whenever the ball is in his hands. My light is all over the place today. This is really fun. As he just makes plays whenever the ball is in his hands, no matter how he gets it. It's on a deep ball, if it's on a kick return. He hasn't returned punts yet, but it's very obvious that he could take a handoff because, he seems to be the next receiver that's going to score a rushing touchdown because Jalen Polk has one, Jalen McMillan has one, and Rome Odunze has one. So feels only right. And Denzel Boston had one last year. So it feels like it's only right for Jeremy Bernard to have a rushing touchdown at some point this season. And you did say before the game started on our YouTube short that he was going to score an anytime touchdown. So, whoever smashed those lines, if you could find him on FanDuel, you're welcome.
I was just saying, FanDuel, if you don't have those odds created already, create them. We're giving you the market for it. These people want it. But also, no, but like that's the thing, to your point, because I was looking at the numbers for my notebook. Bernard's number 4 on the receiver list. And again, in any other offense, in any other year, next year, last year, no matter what year it is, he would be that top 2 guy, right? That he can easily fill them all, the Jalen McMillan, Rome Odunze. Not necessarily maybe as much in production for Rome and Jalen just at this point because he's a sophomore, but he would certainly be right on their heels, 900-yard season, 5, 6, 7 touchdowns. But because where he's at behind those guys, it's just, he's almost taking a learning year. It's kind of like he's an intern this year where it's like, hey, I easily could be the guy running the show here, but I'd rather learn from 2 greats and then next year be the guy that shines with Jalen Polk and others that are probably going to come back.
I know this is Locked On Huskies, so everything we say needs to be taken with a grain of salt because this is the team we watch. This is the team we cover. But I really do think he's going to be like a top 10 receiver in the country next year. He's just that talented. And I mean, you can debate me all you want, or not you specifically, because I know you probably agree with me, but debate me all you want. It's just, you watch everything he does and it's, wow, this guy's unbelievable. And, another thing that we really should mention as we wrap up here is the offensive line. The offensive line was just spectacularly solid and something where I feel like every time Michael Penix dropped back to pass, it was, oh, look at all the time he has. There's just no pressure coming from anywhere. And we did mention that Mateo Mele did seem to get dinged up towards the end of the game, and we're still waiting for an update on that. You might have one as you're listening to this, if you listen to it a little bit later in the day on Monday, as Kalen DeBoer usually talks around 11:30 or noon. So there might be an update. Check us out on Twitter at Tomashoff34, at Lars Hanson. We will provide you with the updates there. But, could you ask for anything more out of this offensive line?
Not to be that guy, but yes. But it has nothing to do with Michael Penix and the pass protection.
That was the handoff.
Yeah, it has everything to do with when you have to get your receivers to run the ball, and the thing is, they're not running the ball up the middle; they're running the ball outside the tackles because you have 2 great bookend tackles. For whatever reason, that middle gap, and it's not necessarily on the players. I think it's for whatever reason, right? Because Parker Brailsford has performed great. Julius Buelo is one of the top 15 guards in the country on PFF and pass blocking, but none of them, including Parker Brailsford, have it in the run game. So I think that's still where they got to fix things.
I like that a lot. Now, it's time for your game changer of the week. Brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company, much like Cameron Fabiculanen, who recorded his 2nd interception in consecutive games. Athletic Brewing Company has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. Their brews are great tasting and award-winning and beat out full-strength beers in global competitions. They're constantly releasing limited edition experimental styles to add to their variety. And one of the best parts about Athletic Brewing Company is no hangovers ever. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you, or you can buy online at athleticbrewingcompany.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewingcompany.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. Now we gave you a little bit on the defense, but now let's jump into it a little bit more here. We love to go in depth here on Locked On Huskies, and I do have a take, and I haven't told you about it yet specifically because I wanted a live reaction, but I want your first thought on the defense before I get into this.
Interesting. Okay. Well, now you have me intrigued. But I mean, overall, I think, again, defense had to do what they had to do. They only gave up 10 points, and the touchdown at the end, it was on Alfonso Tuputala. But again, it's almost like at that point of the game, we know necessarily Alfonso's not the world's greatest in pass coverage. He's not necessarily terrible, right? That's why they're having
it's
him out
just
there.
Not his strength.
But right, exactly. But where you saw Edefano Felicio in the first half of the game able to go out on the boundary and almost get an interception. So I think one of those two obviously can do it. I might want to have Eddie in that situation guarding, in the end zone. But having said that, again, if that's what we're nitpicking here, is certainly against Tulsa, there's no rushing touchdowns allowed. Yes, you give up over 150 yards on the ground, but you're willing to give up the yardage if you don't give up the points that matter. I mean, you could throw for 500. Michael Penix could throw for 800 yards, but if he doesn't throw for a touchdown, it doesn't matter. Again,
right.
Just in that scenario, probably somebody caught a receiver, rushing touchdown, and maybe they broke through and did something there. But the point being, you're willing to give up the yards, but you're not willing to give up the points. They give up the points at the end, but you can live with that because it's one. It's an improvement from Boise State because Boise State found the end zone a couple of times. They took, the screen game wasn't really there. I do think Taylon Green is better than all three of Tulsa's quarterbacks. I think that's a fair assessment, just in my book.
No, it absolutely is. Yeah,
I don't think he played the best against Washington, but I also don't think Taylon Green is worse than any of those three. I think just from a pure player standpoint, Washington faced a better quarterback, and it kind of showed. So if you take the first 2 weeks together, you like what you see. You still want to see more from the pass rush. Maybe allow a little bit less in the run game, but overall, I think they made enough improvements.
So
where are we going?
So you said pass rush, and here is my take. And I know because I've seen some things on Twitter, I am not concerned about the pass rush after 2 weeks. Even though, if we take out Jabar Muhammad's sack, which was just one of the wildest plays I've seen in a long time, the pass rush itself has technically only recorded 2 sacks over 2 weeks because I also don't really want it. I do, and I respect the play because it's a great play. When Cardell Williams was basically running QB power on that fourth down conversion where it does end up being recorded as a sack for Floyd Tanufu. I really did think that it looked like a rushing attempt, but I am not concerned about the pass rush because something I talked to Eric Schmidt about it a little bit last week. And just from watching the game, there were times where it's, the pass rush is getting good pressure. Braylon Trice is getting double and triple teamed on every single snap, and he's still finding a way to, well, he's not necessarily finishing off plays. He's still getting there. And he's really, really close. And that's something where eventually the law of averages states that it's going to even out. And he's going to continue to just get pressure. And Zion Tupuola-Fatui should be back next week against Michigan State, which should help some things also. Fatui Tuitele might be back as well. But it's something where the more I look at what I've seen on film from the front four, the more I'm like, yeah, I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those. It's more of a nitpicking thing than anything else. Because,
absolutely, yeah.
And it's not that it's not that they're getting blown out the ball, right? But again, I mean, Ains talked about it. I think Morrell even talked about it going back into fall camp. Where they got to finish, and again, you can afford to not finish against Boise State. You can afford to not finish against Tulsa, especially with the talent and this coaching staff. It's not going to be a Montana game all over again, where hey, if you don't finish, all of a sudden you might actually lose to this team. But having said that, going into the Saturday against Michigan State, next week against Cal, when you started getting into the meat of the Pac-12, I mean, Cal held Auburn to 13 points, 14 points.
Well,
again,
we could talk about Peyton Thorne.
Right. Peyton Thorne did Peyton Thorne things, but actually Peyton Thorne did also throw for 250 against Washington, over 300 last year. Again,
and also We don't need to get into that. I was going to talk about Keon Coleman, but we don't.
Okay, fair. But the point being, again, the more you start to face these better competition, and also when you go on the road and things like that, that's when it's going to start to matter more. Because if you don't finish and those teams start actually making completions, 15, 20, and that actually turns into touchdowns, now you're starting to pay the price for not finishing. Washington hasn't had to pay the price for not finishing yet.
Right. But that's where, like, personally, when I talk about Jabar Muhammad a little bit in the first segment, I feel like we can just kind of circle back and talk about him a little bit again, where if you just have that guy and because one of the things I put in my story on Inside the Huskies about him is if he's matching up against a Troy Franklin, a Tatairoa McMillan, a Dorian Singer, and yeah, they're going to get some catches. Obviously, he's not going to be perfect against those guys. But if you can just say, yeah, we trust that guy to continue to win battles against that kind of player, and you can just find a way to rotate coverage to the other side of the field, I think that that in itself is enough where they might not necessarily get beat over the top a whole lot, and they don't have to pay the price nearly as often as you might think, as they did last year, where you go back and you watch the Oregon game, you watch some of the things that happened against UCLA where it just felt like they couldn't stop anybody. The Arizona game is another good example of that. But it's something where just having that guy just really does even out just a lot that goes on. And quick reminder here for everybody that college football season is here. And this season, Locked On is kicking up our coverage with Locked On College Football Kickoff Live. Each Friday, Locked On will go live from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on every Locked On College YouTube channel. College Football Kickoff Live will cover playoff implications, conference rivalry games, and go in depth like only Locked On can, including insight and analysis from our stable of Locked On College hosts covering their team every day. Find Locked On College Football Kickoff Live every Friday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern on any Locked On College YouTube channel, so you can find it right here on Locked On Huskies. You won't want to miss it. All right, that was a lot of talking by me. Thoughts, responses, anything?
No, I completely agree. I mean, but I do want to think, and actually going back to your plug, the read that you had earlier, Cameron Fabrickian on the other side of the field, especially playing that free safety role, I think also can help Jabar, because in the sense of if Jabar can take away that side of the field, KFAB able to kind of come down and break and also be able to backpedal and go into coverage deep, that kind of also helps whoever is going to be that far side cornerback to where, hey, you do actually have help over the top that you can trust, and it not overcompensate for, but if DeBon or we saw it actually, what was it, in the first half when Elijah couldn't get in the interception and KFAB almost had it, so KFAB
tipped off both their hands, yeah.
So 5 plays later, KFAB decides to posterize Jabar Muhammad because he's 6'1", 6'2", and Jabar happens to be 5'10". Shout out to the Short People Club. But that being said, it was almost kind of symbolic where it's like, hey, Jabar, if you don't got it, I do. If you got it over there, I'll get it over here. And I think that's kind of just how it's going to have to work for the season until that right corner. DeBon played good, but again, still want to see that consistency in the outside.
He also got a little banged up too.
Exactly. And we all got to remember, Elijah, this is basically his first season full playing.
Yes.
So that he's made it through the first couple of games. He's learning. He's taken some trials and tribulations. But he also, as we stated last week, it was that those holding penalties and those burns weren't also all on him. There was some help over the top that wasn't there. So I think if him and KFAB can maybe get into a little more sync, that's going to help the other side and maybe take away. And also, I wonder maybe if they're going to let Jabar start to float a little more, because we have kind of seen him on that one side, on the far side, or was it near side actually? Yeah, we've seen him on the near side more so. But I'm wondering at some point in the season, do they flip the field? Do they start to say, hey, Jabar, can you roam with a guy? Can we test you that way? Or do you rather just leave it on the side of the field and call it a day?
I like that question a lot, where I feel like it's going to depend on the matchup, because Jabar loves to play man coverage. He's a very aggressive guy who one of the things he told me was, I know when I can take my shots now. I'm feeling really comfortable. And it's something that I get to talk to Jabar basically every time we have player availability at this point. For whatever reason, it's always just me and him. And I love that. Shout out to Jabar. But it's something where I think it's just going to depend on the matchups, because if it's Troy Franklin, if it's the guys I just mentioned, Troy Franklin, Dorian Singer, Tatairoa McMillan, if it's those kinds of guys, why not? Why not just say, all right, number one, cover number one? That's it. It can be that simple. And I know it's something where, NFL coverages have kind of moved away from that. And that's a whole longer debate that we can talk about with Richard Sherman, just some things that I don't need to get into it. I'm getting off track here. But that's something that I like that, because I think that is very possible, but I wouldn't be surprised if they just did say, okay, whoever's going to line up on this side, we're just taking that away. That's fine. You're comfortable on this side of the field. Great. We know you can play man coverage too. Great. But we just want you over here. So that way where, if they line him up on just the wide side of the field and just on the far hash away from him, just so he has a little bit more room to roam because he showed what kind of speed he has. So I think that those are both great possibilities. And personally, I think it's just going to depend on the matchup.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly, you hit the nail on the head because I think, certain games, against, not to harp on Cal here, but, Cal, you can probably just leave Jabar on one side and say, you know what, whoever beats us if they do beat us, right? Because you also want to empower your other far side cornerback to say, hey, you know what, you can handle him too. Jabar's been handling him. Now let's see if you can, because I think you don't want to necessarily take that away from Elijah and Devon. Because not that either one of those guys aren't more competitive, but I think both of those guys want their shot at the best but at the best opposing receiver. So I think you do want to give Jabar that opportunity, but again, you hit the nail on the head. You got to pick your matchups, and they might even do it kind of at different points in the game. Maybe, hey, first half we're going to let Elijah and Devon kind of hang out on that side and figure it out. But then if, let's say, Dorian's going for 180, by the third quarter, it's like, okay, Jabar, over there, let's go. Like, figure it out. Like, just stop that. Stop whatever that happens. That cannot beat us. And those guys, fine, whatever. He cannot beat us.
Now, I think that, betting on Jabar is a solid bet, just like betting with FanDuel, because you can get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 to get 200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use. You can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season with an offer you won't want to miss. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. All right, because I feel like we're going to talk about Michigan State a little bit more, but I think that this is something that we can just kind of carry over into Michigan State conversation where like I said, I didn't really want to get into a nuanced conversation about NFL defenses, but it's something that Bill Belichick does really well. And this is something that you could use with Jabar Muhammad, and maybe it's something we see a little bit more against Michigan State, where you can bracket the number 1 receiver with a Devon Banks or an Elijah Jackson and Cameron Fabiculon over the top. And then the number 2 receiver just gets Jabar Muhammad. It's just, we trust that guy. That's going to be locked down one-on-one, and we have some extra freedom to double on the other side of the field because we know that nothing is going to come over here. So I think that's really possible. And, we do have to take a second to say that as we're recording this on Sunday, Mel Tucker has officially been suspended by the university for sexual misconduct. We won't go into a lot of the details as, things are still coming out. And by the time you're listening to this, some things might have already changed. So we will not touch on that at the moment. But that's something that also is going to come into play this week against Michigan State.
Yeah, as I was kind of thinking about that, I think our extraordinary Darren Riley is going to have an article on Inside the Huskies about that. It probably already has now that when this episode comes out. But I think, for Washington, what Michigan State does and what's happening in East Lansing is not impacted by them. You can't let that come into the game in the sense of, yes, maybe Michigan State can be more motivated, et cetera. But for Washington, it's like you're the number 8 team in the country. You know what's at stake. Just take care of business. It's a business trip. Go out to Detroit, fly, drive to East Lansing, come back to Seattle with a win. That's all you got to do.
I'll bet you anything they're flying directly into East Lansing too, because it must be nice to have that charter plane kind of money.
That's a good point.
But no, it is exactly that, because this is the biggest test we've seen from this team in a while, because, and this is going to sound like a shot at Texas, who took down Alabama on Saturday, because again, for everybody listening to it on Monday, but this is going to sound like a shot at Texas, but this is the biggest test for Washington since the Oregon game, because even though the Texas game kind of was a true road game, since, the Alamo Bowl did take place in Texas, it's just, more of a neutral site feel. There's all this extra time to prep, and it's just the Oregon game. We saw what this team can do in a true road game in a very hostile environment. And not taking any shots here, but that's not necessarily what Michigan State is. But this is just a level of travel that we're not going to see from this team again, really, for the rest of the season, unless they have to go play in a bowl game in Atlanta or wherever. So this is something where, how is that going to affect this team, and will it impact them? I don't really think so, but I think that's something that still needs to be discussed because it's something that will kind of end up being a talking point at some point between now and Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a fair litmus test, making that trip out there. And I think also, in a way, this will also help the players that are going to be coming back for the next 2, 3, 4 years when they make those trips out for the Big Ten games next year. They're not going to have that whole fresh out of water experience next year when you're going to play your first Big Ten road game. Like, whoa, we got to travel all the way out here. It's like, no, you got guys that played at Michigan. You're going to have guys that played at Michigan State this year coming back in the future. So I think it's also not just about this team now, but it's also about the mentality that Kalen wants to have moving forward. Hey, you know what? Our first game in the Big Ten, our first legitimate game in the Big Ten, because 2021 under Jimmy Lake, that
didn't count.
That didn't count. That did not count. But the 2019 Ohio State Rose Bowl did count. And that was ended up being a close game, not necessarily as close in the third quarter. But, once the final whistle blew, it was at least a respectable scoreline. Having said that, this is kind of their first true Big Ten test under Kalen DeBoer. This is their first big road test after Oregon, to your point. And they just seem so prepared that I don't think they're going to let anything faze them. They're not, the Parker brothers returning to their home state. That's not going to be a distraction. If anything, if there's motivation for them to say, hey, you know what? You guys didn't recruit us. And I'll actually have that story coming on Inside the Huskies, talking about how Mel Tucker and Michigan State tried to get one of the two Parker brothers, but wouldn't take the other one. And there are a few other schools that kind of took that same approach. So there's some added motivation for the Parker brothers as well. Say, hey, this is our home state. You guys didn't get us. You guys easily could have got us. I mean, going back to your original point of Michigan State, maybe they wouldn't want to go there anyways. And Jeremy Bernard certainly agreed with that.
Yeah, but having
said that, and I think Caden Hauser was another one that one-time Washington quarterback consideree, was never committed, but was offered by Washington, considered Washington, ended up going to Michigan State. It's also going to be another recruiting test because again, when you're playing Big Ten teams and you're beating Big Ten teams on the road, that's a statement victory, no matter who it is.
And that's something I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more later this week, where you can talk about 4-star recruit Jason Brown, and at 2 of his top 3 schools are Michigan State and Washington. There was a rumor going around, and I won't touch on very much recruiting after this, but that 4-star defensive lineman Dominic Kirks is considering taking a visit to Michigan State for this game. And a rumor that apparently was going around in the Michigan State space was that it was just so he can get another look at Washington. So, that's just something that should be thrown out there no matter what. But moving on, I feel like the one thing we do need to really discuss, and we did talk about a little bit earlier, but is the biggest thing really is going to be the run game on both sides of the ball. And is this something where we're expecting Dylan Johnson to be back in this game? Is this something where it's going to be just the same kind of approach of it's going to be an all-out air raid and, they'll mix in the run every now and again, or is it going to be more balanced?
I mean, I think we saw for the first 2 games, Ryan Grubb really wants to run the ball. I mean, they saw with Sam Adams, and it's like, okay, bro, you've been stopped twice in a row. What are we doing here? Like, I know you're trying to establish the run. John Donovan would be proud. Jimmy Lake would be proud. But man, like,
gotta put that trigger warning on there.
But just for the sake of efficiency, maybe mix in run pass. You just alternate. If you're not getting on the ground, try in the pass. If you're not getting in the pass, then go back to the run. I mean, Ryan Grubb knows how to scheme guys open. I think maybe just early in games, he's trying to still establish the run. I get why. I understand why. Because once you establish the run, even with this dynamic passing game, you now have full control of the game. When you're passing the ball, yes, you do have control, but you're at the liberty of that ball hitting the ground, clock stops, and now you lose momentum and possession, and potentially possession.
And just kind of one extra added thing on that I remember saying to you at the box at some point during the game was there was one play, and it ended up being actually the reverse to Jalen Polk that he scored a touchdown on, where I was just from the formation, everything that was going on, I was like, oh, here comes play action. And there still was a little bit of play action as he did fake a handoff for Michael Penix, faked the handoff for Jalen Polk, ended up getting the ball. But that's just an added layer of just something that you can still add to the passing game is if you can't run the ball, you can't run play action. And that's something where, especially with this offense, because this offense shows how well they can throw the ball every single week. And if you can just have somebody run for 4 or 5 yards a carry, and then you can just, every once in a while, we're going to fake it to this guy now. Just with Adunze, McMillan, Polk, Bernard, Boston, all of these guys can beat you deep. It just adds just an extra layer to the offense as a whole. And then defensively, we know that the Big Ten, they love just that ground and pound style, depending on which teams you talk to. And there were some pretty big gaps that Tulsa was able to exploit against the Washington defense. So that's just something real quick as we wrap up here that I want to make sure that, not only that we touch on, but it's something that, is discussed, because that going forward, if this team can't stop the run and, can't stop just opposing offenses from bleeding clock, then how are you going to get Michael Penix those extra couple possessions every game?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's you hit the nail on the head. Like that's we saw it against Boise State. When you get the turnovers, you're able to get a few more possessions. But we saw a couple turnovers against Tulsa, but not as many turned into points. And so I think there's a few factors that are going to lead into that. But yeah, I mean, they have all the pieces to do it.
Absolutely. Lars, as always, I want to thank you for being here with me today. I want to thank all our everydayers out there for tuning in and, liking, commenting, subscribing, everything that you do. We see it. We really appreciate it. We've gotten some really kind words from some of our everydayers out there on Twitter. We do really appreciate that support. We try to get back to as much of you as we possibly can. And that's something where, it's as the show goes on and grows, we're going to try to do as much of that as we can. We'll probably try to do another mailbag at some point here in the next couple of weeks. But until that point, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, leave us a 5-star review, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, wherever else. We truly appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you on Tuesday.